The Galactic Academy of Interstellar Affairs had never expelled a student in 300 years. That record ended on a Tuesday. Cadet Joe Menadai had made a mistake the moment he stepped foot onto the Academy training floor that morning. He was a Valkyrie, tall, blue-skinned, with 4 arms and a cultural tradition of settling disputes through physical dominance. On his homeworld, striking a smaller opponent was considered a mercy. A warning. A gesture that said, "Know your place, and you will not be further harmed." Joe had been watching the human female for weeks. Mara Ellison was small. Even by human standards, she was compact, 5 feet 4, lean muscle hidden beneath the Academy's standard-issue gray uniform. She kept her dark hair pulled back tight. She rarely smiled. She never boasted. She scored in the top percentile of every tactical and endurance exam, but she did it quietly, without the posturing that the larger cadets used to announce themselves. Joe found her silence arrogant. He found her scores insulting. So when she beat him in a navigation simulation, again, he decided to teach her the Valkyrie lesson. He waited until the corridor emptied between 3rd and 4th period. He stepped in front of her, all 7 feet of him blocking the hallway like a wall of blue stone, and he struck her across the face with one open palm. It was not a full strike. It was a tap, by Valkyrie standards. Enough to sting. Enough to humiliate. Enough to remind her that no matter what a simulation said, there was a physical hierarchy in the real galaxy, and humans were near the bottom of it. Mara's head snapped sideways. The corridor went quiet. Joe smirked and began to turn away. That was his second mistake. Mara Ellison had grown up on Kepler 438b. Most species in the galaxy called it HD7 on their star charts, a footnote. A warning. A planet with 0.91 Earth gravity, 40% higher atmospheric pressure, and a surface that had spent 4 billion years inventing new ways to kill things. Humans called it a home. She had learned to walk in mud that could pull a boot off in 3 seconds. She had learned to run from predators that could sense heat signatures through 2 meters of dense foliage. She had learned to fight, not sport fighting, not academy sparring, but the primal, biological, deeply ingrained fighting that comes from a species that clawed its way to the top of a Deathworld food chain with nothing but pattern recognition and an absolutely obscene pain tolerance. The slap rocked her head. She felt the sting bloom across her cheek. She tasted copper where her teeth had caught the inside of her lip. She turned back around. Joe was already half turned away. He had not even bothered to watch her reaction. That was the thing about species who struck as a social signal, they expected the signal to be received. They expected flinching. Tears. Submission. What he did not expect was a hand on his collar. What he did not expect was 140 pounds of Kepler 438b moving at a speed that his 4-armed neurology was not wired to track, because Valkyrie evolved in low-stimulus flatlands, and humans evolved dodging things that wanted to eat them. What he did not expect was the floor. He hit it hard. All 7 feet of him, face down, one arm twisted behind his back at an angle that sent fire screaming up to his shoulder socket, Mara's knee planted between his shoulder blades with a pressure that felt, to a species used to 0.6 g, like being sat on by a small vehicle. She had not said a word. She still hadn't. Instructor Cale Veyron heard the impact from his office and was out the door in 4 seconds. He was Dravery, a species of calm, methodical logicians who had founded the Academy 2 centuries ago. He had taught here for 40 years. He had mediated disputes between 17 different species, cultures, and atmospheric preferences. He had seen physical altercations before. He had never seen anything like what greeted him in the corridor. Joe Menadai, a Valkyrie male, one of the larger cadets in the cohort, a species that other cadets had been quietly intimidated by for months, was on the floor. He was not unconscious. He was very, very still. The stillness of a creature that had received information it hadn't previously possessed. Mara Ellison was standing 2 feet away, arms at her sides, bleeding slightly from her lip. Her expression was the same expression Kale had seen on her face during every exam, every simulation, every drill. Focused. Present. Unbothered. Around them, perhaps a dozen cadets had gathered in the corridor doorways: Velhari, Dravery, the amphibious Quellan from Sector 9, 2 Marathai who were visibly pressing against the far wall. All of them staring. Kale looked at Joe. He looked at Mara. He looked at the red mark across her cheek. "Cadet Ellison," he said carefully. "Report." She met his eyes. "He struck me first, instructor." I responded. Joe made a sound from the floor, something between protest and pain. I barely touched her, that was a cultural gesture." "I know what it was," Kale said quietly. He had studied Valkyrie customs extensively before accepting a Valkyrie cadet into his cohort. He also knew that the Academy's charter was explicitly clear: physical intimidation of fellow cadets, regardless of cultural context, constitutes a violation of the Interspecies Conduct Code. He looked down at Joe for a long moment. "Can you stand?" "Yes." "Then stand. And report to the conduct office. Immediately." Joe stood, slowly, rotating his shoulder with a grimace that told Kale the joint would need medical attention. He shot a look at Mara that was no longer arrogant. It was something much more complicated. Mara did not look back at him. She was already reaching into her bag for her tablet, preparing for class. The hearing lasted 2 days. Kale presented the corridor surveillance footage. He presented the Academy's conduct code. He presented Mara Ellison's medical report: minor lip laceration, a bruised cheekbone that would fade in 4 days, and then he presented something the conduct board had never seen used in a disciplinary hearing before: a species impact assessment. Cadet Menadai struck Cadet Ellison, believing the physical disparity between species made the gesture low risk, he said, standing before the 7-member board in the high-ceilinged marble chamber that smelled of recycled air and institutional gravity. He was operating on an assumption common to many non-human species encountering humans for the first time. He clicked to the next slide. It showed Kepler 438b's atmosphere stats. Predator density charts. Comparative musculature analysis between a Valkyrie male and a human female with a Deathworld upbringing. That assumption, Kale said, was incorrect. The board chair, a silver-feathered Quellan elder named Cirrus, studied the data with her 4 eyes moving in independent directions. "You're saying the human responded proportionally?" "I'm saying the human responded accurately," Kale said. Cadet Ellison spent her formative years on a planet where the average terrestrial predator outweighs her by 200 kilograms. Her nervous system is calibrated for threat response at speeds and force outputs that most Academy cadets, regardless of species, cannot match. Cadet Menadai initiated physical contact. Cadet Ellison neutralized the threat using minimum necessary force and then stopped. He paused. She did not pursue. She did not escalate. She stopped the moment the threat was neutralized and waited for Academy authority to arrive. That is, by our own conduct code, exactly what a cadet is supposed to do. Cirrus was quiet for a long moment. "And Cadet Menadai?" Kale did not answer immediately. He thought about Joe, who was not a bad cadet, not a cruel being, but a young male from a species who had never had to learn that the galaxy contained things that looked small and soft and quiet right up until they weren't. Who had grown up in a culture where physical size was the final answer to every question of hierarchy, and had never once had that assumption challenged. Until Tuesday. Cadet Menadai initiated unprovoked physical contact against a fellow cadet, Kale said. The Academy's record on this is unambiguous. Joe Menadai was expelled on a Wednesday. He was the first cadet expelled from the Galactic Academy of Interstellar Affairs in 300 years. The news traveled fast, the way news always travels in closed academic communities, in whispered corridors and mess hall tables and late-night study rooms. And the story that traveled was not the story Joe had written in his head when he'd raised his hand in that hallway. The story that traveled was Mara's. The quiet human girl from the Deathworld who had bled and said nothing and waited, and then, when she needed to, had moved like something the galaxy hadn't thought to be afraid of yet. Cale found her in the training room 3 days later, running endurance circuits alone. He watched her for a moment from the doorway, the rhythm of it, the economy of motion, nothing wasted. Cadet Ellison. She stopped. Instructor. How's your cheek? Fine. She touched it briefly. Almost gone. He nodded. He was quiet a moment. Then, you knew the outcome before you moved. It was not a question. She looked at him with those calm, dark eyes. I knew he expected me to flinch. And you decided not to. I decided, she said simply, to be accurate. Cale Veyron had been teaching for 40 years. He had met cadets from 62 species across 9 star systems. He walked back to his office, sat down, and updated his course notes. When encountering a human, he wrote, do not mistake quietness for smallness. Do not mistake patience for weakness. And above all, do not mistake a Deathworld species for harmless. They will correct you. Accurately.